I'm Vinnie Politan. The subject of my investigation is the tragic mass murder of 4 innocent University of Idaho students. Their killer got a deal from prosecutors and admitted to his crimes to avoid the firing squad. Here's the story. On the frigid night of November 13th, 2022, in the college town of Moscow, Idaho, 4 promising students were brutally slain in a crime that shattered the peace of a sleepy campus. Inside their off-campus rental home, Kaylee Goncalves and Madison Mogen were attacked in bed, their lives stolen in a vicious assault. On the floor below, Ethan Chapin and Xana Kernodle met the same fate. Xana believed to have fought back with her last dying breath. The killer moved with eerie silence, bypassing 2 other roommates who survived the night unaware. No one heard screams. No one saw a shadow. By the time help was called, the sun had already risen on a house soaked in horror. Panic gripped the town. Weeks passed before a 28-year-old criminology PhD student was arrested, linked by DNA on a knife sheath left behind. And now, this killer has admitted to his crimes inside a courtroom. And yes, he has admitted to his crimes. It wasn't exactly the most detailed admission that we've seen. Many times when there's an allocution, a defendant will be asked to give some specifics about what you did in your own words. When I was a prosecutor, that's the way we did it in New Jersey. The judge would ask the defendant, so tell me what you did. Tell me why you're guilty. Didn't exactly happen in this case, but I want you to take a look at some of the back and forth, as brief as it was, between the judge and the mass murderer.
Did you, on November 13th, 2022, in Latah County, state of Idaho, kill and murder Madison Mogen, a human being?
Yes.
Did you, on or about that same date in Moscow, Idaho, kill and murder Kaylee Goncalves, a human being?
Yes.
And did you, on that same date in Moscow, Idaho, kill and murder Xana Kernodle, a human being?
Yes.
And then on or about November 13th, 2022, again in Latah County, Idaho, did you kill and murder Ethan Chapin, a human being?
Yes.
And here is the family of Kaylee Goncalves outside of the courthouse. They were not on board for this deal. They've been very outspoken throughout all this, strong advocates for justice, strong advocates for Kaylee. And there's going to be a sentencing. It's scheduled for the 23rd of this month. Of course, you'll see it on court TV. But that brings me to the first question in our investigation, which is, what will Kaylee's family say at sentencing? We all know that victims have some rights, right? Victim impact statements. I'd like to bring in someone who can help us answer that question. Attorney Shanon Gray, who represents the family of victim Kaylee Goncalves. Shanon, thank you so much for joining us. We really do appreciate it. I know everyone's been trying to get a piece of you in the last few days, so we appreciate your time tonight. First, let the folks at home know how the Goncalves family is doing after this shocking turn of events.
Well, it was a hard day for them. You know, Christy told me that it was probably one of the second hardest day of the whole time that they've been involved in this. The first was finding out that Kaylee had been murdered, and then the other day for the pleading. You know, it was not only that the deal that was struck really didn't get a lot of victims' input at all, if not any. But it was also the process, the way that they did it, which was so brash and unprofessional. You know, getting an email about the offer, talking to us a little bit about it on Friday, and then rushing to do the plea, you know, a day and a half later. So the whole process really put a bad taste in everybody's mouth, and really a horrible ending to this, over 2-year process, what they've been going through, this kind of hell that they've been going through. So not a good day.
Is there a sense that they have not been treated fairly? Is there a sense that the system, whether it's the DA's office, the court, whoever, just the way as a victim's family they've kind of been, and I guess the best word is treated through all of this? And is there a sense, because I thought I heard Steve Goncalves say something about the way the killer's family has been treated versus his own family, and he was a little upset there. I don't know if you could fill in some of the blanks on that.
Well, I think from the get-go, when we first started this, we were adversarial to a certain degree. Just really, they called it adversarial. We were just asking questions. Why was the mayor speaking? Why was the coroner calling victims' families? Why was the lead investigator on the case having only 2 years of experience in the Moscow Police Department when there were probably 15 or 20 that had 15 to 20 years? Why was he the lead investigator? All of these questions that we were just kind of asking to get some answers to, they found adversarial at the beginning. And so, that kind of set the stage, and they've been that way almost the entire time. It's pulling teeth to get information. We've probably found out more information in the last 6 months with the motions that have been filed and some of those memorandums and those affidavits and those things that are open and have provided some factual evidence over the last 6 months than we've known for the last, almost 2 years. So
when it comes to the sentencing, how many members of the family do you believe will be permitted to speak or will speak?
I don't know. I mean, it's really, obviously for Judge Hippler, even though the sentence is probably what the sentence is going to be, I don't see him minimizing it in any way or going lower. But under the statute, the victims only certain close family members, immediate family members can give victim impact statements. I don't know if Judge Hippler is going to allow everybody to do it or just a few. And I'm not sure which ones will be showing up for the sentencing. I think it's something that the family has to discuss. They're not firm believers in the way that the process has gone on so far. And Steve wasn't in the courtroom the other day, but that's something that they're still discussing and something that they'll, eventually come to a conclusion about who will be giving statements, who will be there, who won't be there, that type of stuff. So,
and according to the rules there, and I've seen it because we cover cases in all 50 states, and the rules vary when it comes to victim impact. Some jurisdictions and some judges allow a victim to speak directly to the defendant. Others don't. Some don't even allow them to say anything about the defendant themselves. What are the parameters and rules? What's your understanding of how that is going to play out?
Well, really, it's up to the judge, to make those decisions. But I suspect the judge will allow the witnesses or the victims' families to make really any statement that they want. There hasn't been any inkling or any information from the court or from the Lady Hawk prosecutor's office that has limited us in what we can say for the victim statements or things like that. That may come along in the next week or so. But right now, I think that they can pretty much say whatever they want, and I'm sure they will.
Are there lingering questions that the family has about what happened here?
Well, so many questions. I think in the statement that the family put out the other day, it's really there's no answers really to anything. We had a meeting when we had the meeting on the last Friday with the Latah County Prosecutor's Office. One of the things that we asked for was a meeting after the sentencing to try to see if we can get some additional information about what was going on. We also requested, a copy of the discovery. And some of it will probably obviously have to be redacted, but a copy of that discovery. And that's something that they said that they would do for us because, like I told the family, we don't want to have to wait for 3 or 4 years of public records requests to get all the discovery and the investigation in this case. We want to be able to see it. And that provides closure, that provides answers. And being able to speak to some of the investigators and ask them questions about things will provide a little bit of closure because, saying I'm guilty and agreeing that there are sufficient facts, to commit that are for the crimes or the charges that were there is not enough for the family.
Yeah, it seems only right. I mean, at a minimum, because there's not going to be a trial. You're not, during a trial, you often learn things, and unfortunately, a lot of times families learn things for the first time during the trial. That's not going to happen. The factual basis provided very little information in court the other day, so it seems they should get that information. I wanted to get your reaction to one other thing that happened the other day. Now, the Goncalves family Facebook page, there was a post on there, and this was before the hearing from July 1st, and part of it read, talking about that the family was not happy with the plea. It's not final. It's not over till it's over. And then there were a couple of sentences here. If you feel called or moved to try to make a difference, please contact the Ada County Courthouse to express your thoughts or feelings. The number available online, and then the number was given. And then before things even started in court, the judge seemed to address that. I want to take a quick listen to that.
I want to point out that there have been calls by some for the public to contact me and my office in an attempt to influence my decision-making in this case. This has been extraordinarily disruptive for court staff and the ability for them to get work done, not only in this case, but in other cases where defendants are entitled to have their cases processed, and frankly, as important, if not more so, for victims to have their cases processed in those cases. It's also highly inappropriate.
Yeah, Shanon, I want to get your response to the judge's reaction.
I'm personally not going to make any comments on it.
Okay.
But the family itself thought it was pretty inappropriate. To start off the plea of Mr. Kohberger and the murder of 4 beautiful people, to start it off with admonishing, the victim's family in the case. I'm not sure that was the best use of time, and obviously the family thinks that it was completely inappropriate. I think when we released the statement the other day, we were hoping that maybe next time the judge will take the high road and not really start off a plea like that when really the family has gone through hell for 2.5 years.
Yeah.
And experienced all kinds of online, you name it, accusations and trolling and all kinds of stuff. And, Judge Hippler's only been involved in this case for a couple of months. There's got to be, at least a little bit of empathy there. That I think the family thought that there should have been a little bit more empathy there with how he was handling it. And, maybe he will look back and reflect on that. I think they're hopeful that he will, and maybe take the high road next time on a case like this.
Yeah, and the balance of things, the mass murder of 4 young people versus some phone calls. That's unbelievable. Shanon Gray, always great to have you on the program. Please send our best to the family. I'll let them know that we're thinking about them all through this. Thank you so much.
Have a great day. Thanks for having me.
All right, folks, when we come back, what does the killer's signature reveal?
As to count 2, murder in the first degree as it relates to the murder of Madison Mogan. How do you plead, guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
We want to understand the mindset behind your actions in this case.
I'm going to give you a new scoop.
What happened?
I did it.
Really funny, really. I'm laughing. Did you see me? I laugh.
I don't want any of this. You think you should get some kind of credit for not killing people?
Not at all, no.
You are a shrewd operator.
Interview with a Killer. Marathon starting Friday, 11:10 Central. Only on Court TV.
As to count 2, murder in the first degree as it relates to the murder of Madison Mogan. How do you plead, guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
As to count 3, as it relates to murder in the first degree for the murder of Kaylee Goncalves, how do you plead, guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
As to count 4, the first degree murder of Xana Kernodle, a human being, how do you plead, guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
As to count 5, the first degree murder of Ethan Chapin, a human being, how do you plead, guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
So when you enter a guilty plea, in any case, whether it's super serious like this case or a much lesser case, you usually have to fill out what we called it when I was a prosecutor, were the plea sheets, right? The plea agreement and the factual basis. Well, that happened in this case, and we took a look at it, and something really stuck out to us, which was the defendant's signature. Take a look. This is from his plea agreement. You can see his signature there on the bottom right-hand side. And we're like, oh, not exactly what I expected it to look like. Something's going on there. Then take a look at the on the written factual basis, which he didn't write out. It was typed up and he just signed it. But again, we're looking at this guy. We've heard about him. We've been studying him. And here we take a look at what his signature looks like on the pieces of paper that will keep him behind bars for the rest of his life. Which brings us to the next question in our investigation. What does the killer's signature reveal? Gonna need some help for that one. Joining us, Dr. Janie Lacey, psychotherapist and CEO of Life Counseling Solutions, and Chris McDonough, former homicide detective and host of the very popular The Interview Room with Chris McDonough. All right, Dr. Janie Lacey, we looked at it and I just look at it like, not what I expected. What are your thoughts about his signature?
Well, Vinnie, when I look at his signature in and of itself, I have to bring in all the other behavioral indicators that we will look that would validate what we do know about him. So when we're looking at his signature, also consider a couple other things, right? When we think about his methodical stalking patterns, right? The cell phone data that we know that showed that he visited the neighborhood at least 12 times before the murder. So I think that's important to note. And then we also know that there was careful targeted selection in that sense that he bypassed the 2 roommates on the first floor, suggesting specific victim targeting. And then we look at the controlled violence, right? Despite the brutal nature of what happened, he maintained enough control to avoid detection for nearly seven weeks. So what this reveals to me about the killer is that there was some planning, which that repetitive, how he was moving about things wasn't impulsive. So he studied routines and entry points and victim behavior. So some need for control. That signature can show someone who needed to feel dominant and command of the situation. And then we're also looking at these risk-taking behaviors with the calculated elements that we now know to be true. He was willing to return to the same area repetitively and thought that he was smart enough to do it during low activity hours. So, potentially possible narcissistic tendencies, leaving things which indicate arrogance or believing he was smarter than investigators. So when we take into all those types of actions, I think this signature here isn't just about in and of itself, but it's about the violence, his methodical stalking patterns that we know to be true. The 12 visits to scout the location tells us that the killer needed to feel completely in control before acting.
Chris McDonough, your thoughts? I mean, these are the papers that he signed, basically like not signing away your life, but signing away his freedom. What did you think when you saw them?
Vinnie, I think it's really interesting, what the fact that he is losing control. I think that's the biggest piece of this puzzle for him right now. And that signature that he puts on that plea agreement just kind of demonstrates that. Remember, he methodically planned this homicide out. And once he got in there, it was essentially an organized type of crime scene type of situation. And as the murders started to unfold, he runs into, an unknown, i.e. Xana. And he starts losing control at that point. And I've always felt that's when the sheath was dropped. I don't think it was intentional. I think it was just, he was running out of control. And as he kills, Xana and Ethan in the other room, we also have another type of signature there where he starts to slash Ethan's lower torso. And that is indication of, sexual fantasy type of stuff that he's been thinking about for a long time. And Ethan got in the way. And when you hear him answer about whether or not he killed Ethan, his voice drops and it's a little bit firmer where he says yes.
Wow.
So I think this is about control for him and him losing it.
All right, Dr. Jenny Lacey, Chris McDonough are going to stick around. Up next, what impact did the killer's education have on his crimes? I'm Vinnie Politan. We continue our investigation of the horrific, senseless mass murder of 4 young adults from the University of Idaho. Their killer was facing a trial and a potential death sentence, but got a deal from prosecutors, so he admitted to his crimes. Here's the story. In the stillness of a November night in 2022, terror struck a quiet college town. 4 University of Idaho students, Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogan, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin, were brutally murdered in their off-campus home in Moscow, Idaho. Stabbed as they slept, their young lives were stolen in a crime so savage it shook the nation. There were no screams heard, no calls made until morning. 2 roommates slept through the massacre. A trail of mystery and horror followed. No forced entry, no suspects, no answers. Weeks of fear gripped the campus as investigators combed through DNA, surveillance, and digital clues. Then came a criminology PhD student arrested across the country in Pennsylvania, accused of carrying out the killings with surgical precision. A knife sheath left behind linked him to the scene. The case shocked the country. Brilliant futures cut short, families shattered, and a community left to wonder how evil could creep in so quietly. And now that killer has admitted to his crimes in court. PhD student. That's a key factor connected to this killer. Key factor. You're a PhD student. Well, when he was an undergrad, he was taught by someone named Dr. Catherine Ramsland, someone who has been on this show many times as an expert. She's an expert of experts. She was also the professor and advisor to this killer when he was at DeSales University. So Brian Enton, great correspondent with News Nation, had an opportunity to speak with Dr. Catherine Ramsland about this. Take a listen.
I met him in the fall of 2018 when he came to DeSales University. He had an associate's degree and he was going to get into our 4-year program as a psychology major. He selected the forensic track, which made him an advisee for me because I managed the forensic track. And he was also in my class that semester. He seemed like eager to be in the classroom. He was polite, he was respectful, intense, and curious. And there was no reason for me to think that he was anything other than someone who was really interested in this potential career. There really weren't any red flags. He was always really quite respectful and grateful. He would thank me for things. He was attentive. He would do the work. I didn't have any concerns.
I think it was 4 classes that you taught him in. What were those classes?
There were 3 undergraduate courses in the forensic track that I taught, and he was in all of them. Well, one was Introduction to Forensic Psychology. Another was my death investigation class, which was called Psychological Sleuthing. And the third one was called Dangerous Minds, the Psychology of Antisocial Behavior. And then he got into the graduate program in criminal justice for a master's degree. And he took a course with me called Behavioral Criminology.
Unbelievable, right? You think about that. The classes: Intro to Forensic Psychology, Psychological Sleuthing, Dangerous Minds, the Psychology of Antisocial Behavior, and Behavioral Criminology. 4 of the classes that he took from Dr. Catherine Ramsland. And that brings us to the next question in our investigation. What impact did the killer's education have on his crimes? Let's bring in our guests who are going to help us answer this question. Still with us, Dr. Janie Lacey, and now joining us, journalist Howard Blum. He's also the author of When the Night Comes Falling, a Requiem for the Idaho Student Murders. Howard, what are your thoughts about the connection here between the education that he was having and undergoing and the crimes?
When I went to visit the DeSalle campus and I looked into the forensic psychology department, the criminal justice department, I was given a tour of what's called the murder house. It's a 19th century stone cottage, really, just off campus. And inside of it, there are mannequins sprawled all across the floor. They have red paint over them. They're supposed to be corpses at a murder scene. And Bryan Kohberger made this voyage through this house. He saw these mannequins, and it was very much, in many ways, just like what happened at the house on King Road. When he went through this as a student, he was taught how to look for clues. When he did it as a criminal, as a murderer, it was how to hide clues. Catherine Ramsland, who was his professor, she suggested maybe she inspired him. In one of her books, she talks about how killers fantasize about the crimes, and then the fantasy leads them to the reality. They have to act out. And I think Bryan Kohberger's education pushed him forward to his decision to act out.
It's unreal. This is like a scary movie that you know Hollywood write, but this is real life. This is mass murder. I want to take a look, Dr. Janie Lacey, a little more of Brian Entin from News Nation, his interview with Dr. Catherine Ramsland.
Is there anything, Dr. Ramsland, when you look back and you think about the curriculum of those classes, and not getting into his specific experience, but when you think about what you taught in those classes that you think, oh my gosh, he may have used that in what he's now accused of doing here in Idaho?
Well, the antisocial behavior course involves serial killers and mass murderers, and we do a lot of case analysis. I use two books that I wrote. One was written with the BTK killer, whom you just mentioned, and his decision process and the crimes and how he thought about them and felt about them and what was it like for him, to be caught. So that's a very intense book. And also I have one called The Mind of a Murderer, which was about various behavioral experts over the past century who interviewed killers, mass murderers, and serial killers to get as close as possible, spending a lot of time with them to get as close as possible to their process of becoming a criminal. And so he would have been exposed to that. I think now looking back, I would look at maybe some of the things that interested him as being, something that gives me pause. But we always have to think about, we all know, everyone in this field, forensic psychology and criminology, know that we could have students who might become offenders. But we also know that the vast majority of our students will not, and will instead go into a field like law enforcement, FBI, Secret Service, that make the world better, that protect us, that So we know that there's always a risk that we're attracting somebody who wants to do something terrible. Hoping we won't ever have that, but you know, in my case, I did.
Dr. Janie Lacey, that's kind of chilling. What are your thoughts here about the connection between his education and the crimes?
Well, Vinnie, I think there's definitely is a connection, and it's just mind-boggling to also think that in his teaching role, he was actually instructing others about criminal behavior. But I also remember in some of the information that was coming out that I believe it was in April of 2022, his survey where he was actually asking criminals like, why did you choose your victim, and what were you thinking and feeling after committing the crime? So when I think about his education influencing his crime, right, he now has crime scene awareness. His studies would have taught him about DNA evidence, surveillance, and investigative techniques, probably victim selective methodology. The academic understanding of victimology may have influenced his targeting approach. And then if we also think about attempted evidence manipulation and cleaning his car and removing internal components, showing, you know, potentially sophisticated awareness of forensic evidence. And then we think about the timeline awareness, you know, during the prime sleep hours when the victims were most vulnerable. So I would say when we think about this criminal justice education, you know, a couple things. Knowledge didn't make him a better criminal. Right? Despite his education, he left some crucial DNA evidence, and academic interests may have been a symptom, but it's not a cause. And I believe, you know, as we just listened to that, we want to also express that. But for him, I would probably say it was an expression of an existing darker interest, but it wasn't the source of it. So I would definitely say, Vinnie, that his criminology education likely gave him a false sense of confidence, and he knew enough to be dangerous, but not enough to avoid detection.
Yeah, thank goodness. Dr. Janie Lacey, thank you so much. Howard Blum's going to stay with us. When we come back, still more from the killer's former professor as we try to answer the question of how much impact did his education have on his crimes.
I have to look at the framework of what I taught and wonder, did I inspire him?
Matriarch of the Adelson family gets arrested.
Terrible. Donna Adelson is facing charges of murder, the death of her former son-in-law, Dan Markell.
Prosecutors say a bitter child custody battle was the motive for the murder-for-hire plot.
Now that Donna has turned into a defendant, what's next for the Adelson clan?
Now that the ship is really sinking fast, blood doesn't matter that much.
The Matriarch Mastermind murder trial. Live coverage begins this August on Court TV.
The idea of wanting to study offenders and what their thought process was, how they felt about their crimes, wanting to study that and then finding out that this is a person who then is now saying he's guilty of doing these things. I have to look at the framework of what I taught and wonder, did I inspire him in some way? Did I, you know, but I can't second guess that, because I may have inspired somebody else to become an FBI agent.
That is Dr. Catherine Ramsland. She is the former professor and advisor of the Idaho 4 killer when he was at DeSales University. Unbelievable. And we're taking a look at his education and trying to answer the question, what impact did his education have on the crimes that he committed? The mass murder of 4 innocent students at the University of Idaho. Here to help us answer that question, Chris McDonough and Howard Blum, still with us. Chris, what do you think? Do you think he went to study crime and got inspired to commit a crime, or do you think he all along wanted to commit a crime and then studied it to get better at it?
You know, Vinnie, having spent 13 years in homicide, I've talked to hundreds of these guys, and here's always the correlation. what's going on earlier in their development, and then you kind of move them through the conversation into what inspired you to get to the place that you were at. And for him, you know, remember he felt empty inside during his visual snow problems. He was bullied. At 15, he wrote a rap song about calling himself the devil. And so at some point, he was trying to find himself. He went through an addiction problem, and now he finds himself trying to get into law enforcement. That doesn't work, so he goes the criminology side. And the question that I'm going to have for Dr. Bloom, or excuse me, Dr. Ramsland, is what were his fixations while he was studying? We know Bundy played a big role based on the evidence of all the photographs on his phone. We also know there was other inappropriate material on his phone. Those are the kind of things that I want to know that play into this.
Let's take a listen to more of that interview on News Nation by Bryan Entin of Dr. Catherine Ramsland.
It's not just what happened to the victims. I really thought Bryan Kohberger was a promising student who really could have made a mark in this career in a very positive way. I thought that. So disappointed, angry, and very shocked that this is who he turned out to be, and horrified for the victims and their families.
What did you think when you first heard that Bryan Kohberger, your former student, was arrested for this?
I was completely floored. I didn't believe it. And his demeanor that we saw on media was that he was confident that he was going to be able to prove his innocence. So I wanted to wait and see. I wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt. But as months go by and he kept saying that he had an alibi, and I wondered, well, why are you sitting in jail? Give us your alibi, get out. And that wasn't happening. And then it was really when he said his alibi, and it was clearly not an alibi, and he would have known that, certainly from all the classes that he had through undergraduate and graduate work. He would have understood that wasn't really an alibi. I think that was when I was really, floored that this is my student who has done these things.
Howard, what did you learn in all your research? She described him as a promising student. Do you think at any point he wanted to use this knowledge for good rather than for bad?
I think the tragedy of Bryan's life was he was trying to overcome what his natural instinct was. He tries to reinvent himself. He loses, 100 and some odd pounds. He he quits heroin. You know how hard that is, how many people try to do that. He finds the will to do all these things. He makes his way from a junior college, a community college, to DeSalle University, and then to Washington State. And yet he can't really transcend who he is, his very nature. And what's interesting, Dr. Ramsland talks about how she wonders if she inspired Bryan. Well, what's going to happen in the future years, now that Bryan's going to be in jail, he's going to be inspiring a whole generation of forensic psychologists, of professors like Dr. Ramsland, who are going to be coming to his cell door and trying to talk with him. Dr. Ramsland, has already asked, do you want to meet with Bryan? She says, I've been thinking about that for the past 2.5 years. One could say that might be why she reached out to Bryan's parents originally after his arrest. She says it was just to give them solace, but then in another interview she talks about for 2.5 years she's been thinking about getting in a room with him and getting answers. So, he's now going to inspire people. He's going to be in jail, and he is, this is not a punishment really for him. He's going to be fulfilling another part of himself. He's going to be completing this journey that he went on.
Let's take a listen, because that's fascinating. You're talking about that. Let's take a listen to that part of Bryan Entin's interview on News Nation, talking about wanting to interview the killer.
Would you want to study Bryan Kohberger? Have you put any thought into that? Is that something that you think could be possible?
I've been thinking about that for 2.5 years. I would. I mean, this is my work. If he wanted to do that, I would. And within the framework of this is what we do to try to look at developmental trajectories, the triggers, so that we can see the red flags faster. We can prevent people like this from wreaking the havoc that they do. So if he wanted to do that, I know that he's got the intellectual capacity to do it, to be self-reflective, to help think through how his life came to this. And so I would definitely do it if he were willing. And it would be hard, but I think because I have so much material from him, I have questions for him that I think nobody else but me could ask.
Chris McDonough, how much value do you think there is in speaking with him, whether it's from the psychological perspective or from the homicide detective perspective? What could anyone learn from this mass murderer?
Well, I think it's always important, Vinnie, that, the behavior science unit and folks, such as Dr. Ramsland and others, get a shot to talk to him. The challenge that I see right now, though, is he is controlled from day one, evident of the fact that he sat in front of her for a couple of years. And so he's going to end up talking to somebody that he can correct them. When you start talking about his crimes, remember, he's the one that has it locked away, and he's going to be the one that says, no, you got it wrong. I actually went here. And so he's going to be the educator. And as long as you can keep him in that position, I think he'll talk like a bird.
Howard, would you want to talk to him? We have about 40 seconds here.
You bet. I'm ready to go. I like to get his story, especially since this judge has left all these mysteries remaining. I think the families, the state of Idaho, the citizens, we all want to get answers. We want to know why. We want to know precisely what happened. I'd like to hear from Bryan. I'd love to go speak with him, sure.
We have about 20 seconds left here. Chris, how about you?
He's just going to manipulate everybody and lie for the first couple of years. So I'll wait till everything's calms down.
Till the dust settles. Big thank you, Chris McDonough, the interview room with Chris McDonough. And Howard Blum, When the Night Comes Falling, a requiem for the Idaho student murders. Appreciate your insight and, of course, your valuable time. Have a great holiday weekend. Thank you so much. I've spoken to so many victims, families, and murder cases I've covered over the past few decades. And for the most part, what they want is accountability, which gives them a sense of justice. They also want to know what happened. Usually a trial or investigation can reveal that answer, but not always. Finally, there is usually one big lingering question that rarely gets answered, and I don't know if it gets answered in this case. Why? I'm Vinnie Politan. We'll keep digging for answers as the investigation continues.